Hello everyone. Welcome to part 5 of Through the Veil, which is our exploring the sanctuary message. We're putting this message together for Sunday keeping denominations who may not have had a chance to study about the sanctuary, or who believe maybe that it's an Old Testament theology and really has no bearing on modern day Christians. So it's our intention to show that the sanctuary is in fact a message for our time, and what the implications are for these last days. Now, if you've been following through the last 4 videos, then you've seen through the Old Testament the sacrificial system, and on the last video we got to the point where the sanctuary is about to be built, and so we see that God gave Moses a pattern, something to follow in order to build this sanctuary. Mainly that he wanted Moses to follow this pattern exactly because it was a pattern of the heavenly sanctuary, the tabernacle that was pitched by God and not by man. We find that in the book of Hebrews in chapter 9. So today I'm going to be covering the furniture that made up the sanctuary, both inside and outside. I won't get into what each article of furniture symbolizes. I think I'll save that for Brother Gordon next week. It's a deep study in itself. So today I just want to give a basic layout of the sanctuary, so that you can kind of picture it in your mind and get an idea of it. So we'll start in Exodus chapter 26 and verse 30. And it says, "And thou shalt rear up the tabernacle according to the fashion thereof, which was showed thee in the mount." Now this is something that God says over and over and over again. Make sure that you build this after the pattern which was showed you in the mountain. It has to be exact. And there's a reason for that, because the sanctuary was a teaching tool. It was something that was meant to instruct Israel about their coming Savior. Type meets antitype, which is a very big theme in the Bible that we'll discover and we'll continue to expound on later on. So in Exodus chapter 30, verses 1 through 3, we're going to get to the first article of the sanctuary. We'll come back to that. Let's start with the altar. Okay, so basically the tabernacle is this big tent, okay, in the wilderness. It's near the camp of the congregation, but not in the camp of the congregation, okay? And so you have the courtyard, the outer court, and then you have the altar of burnt sacrifice. You have a laver, which is kind of like a bathtub, I guess you could say, for washing, for ceremonial washing. Now inside the sanctuary, you have to your right the table of showbread. To straight ahead in front of you would be the altar of incense. To the left of you would be the golden candlestick. Now it's important to explain that the sanctuary is divided into 2 separate compartments. There's the holy place and the most holy place, which in the Hebrew is Kadesh. The word is Kadesh. Now the words are used interchangeably, but there are definitely 2 separate apartments, because the Ark of the Covenant was kept in the most holy, and that was the only article of furniture that was kept in the most holy place, the second apartment. And that apartment was only entered once a year, which we'll get into later on when we discuss the Day of Atonement and the antitypical Day of Atonement. So if you were looking straight ahead at the tabernacle, it would be almost in the shape of a cross. If you looked at the articles of furniture, it's a cross, okay, which is an interesting parallel considering that the entire sanctuary is meant to point to Christ and his sacrifice. So you have the altar of burnt sacrifice. You have the laver by the door, which was used for washing. The priests would have to wash their hands and their feet before they entered into the tabernacle, so that they wouldn't track any dirt in there or defile the tabernacle. Under pain of death, they had to wash. Then when you enter into the tabernacle on your right, you would have the table of showbread directly in front of you before the veil which separated the holy place from the most holy place. You would have the altar of incense, where they would offer frankincense and myrrh and certain spices. They would burn those as an incense, and this symbolizes prayer, but we'll get into that next week. And also, on your left-hand side, you would have the golden candlestick, which had 7 branches, which symbolizes the 7 churches in the book of Revelation, and also the oil symbolizing the Holy Spirit. So we have this design of a cross. Okay, now let's go to Exodus chapter 27, and we will start with verse 1. And it says, "And thou shalt make an altar of shittim wood, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits broad. The altar shall be 4 square, and the height thereof shall be 3 cubits." Now keep in mind, a cubit is about the length from elbow to fingertips on a man's arm. "And thou shalt make the horns of it upon the 4 corners thereof. His horns shall be of the same, and thou shalt overlay it with brass." So we have this altar of burnt offering. It has 4 horns, one on each corner of the altar, and they overlay the horns with brass. Now, there would be blood touched to these horns as part of the sacrificial system, and we'll see that later on. But in verse 3 it says, "And thou shalt make his pans to receive his ashes, and his shovels, and his basins, and his flesh hooks, and his fire pans. All the vessels thereof thou shalt make of brass." And then verse 6, it says, "And thou shalt make staves for the altar, staves of shittim wood, and overlay them with brass." Now staves are poles, meaning that they would have poles running across it so that you could pick it up and carry it. The tabernacle was mobile. They would break down, that's why it was a tent. They would break it down and bear the different parts with brass or gold poles, as well as the Ark of the Covenant. The articles of furniture were borne between 4 men, 2 on each side, and they were borne by the Levites, who were the priesthood. So we see here shittim wood. What is shittim wood? Well, it's acacia, which grew it grew abundantly in the wilderness. It's a very hardy wood for surviving in the desert. It can survive without a lot of water, and it's a very rugged and rigid wood. And it's also very valuable, something that people don't know about nowadays. But it's a valuable wood, and then they overlaid it with brass, or they overlaid it with gold. The Ark of the Covenant was overlaid with gold, but it was a box of acacia wood that was overlaid completely round about with gold. Now we see for the altar of burnt offering. Now let's go to the laver. I'm going to go in order from outside in, basically. So Exodus chapter 30, verses 17 through 21. Okay. And so we see, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Thou shalt also make a laver of brass." Laver meaning like a wash tub. "And thou shalt put it between the tabernacle of the congregation and the altar, and thou shalt put water therein. For Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands and their feet thereat. When they go into the tabernacle of the congregation, they shall wash with water, that they die not. Or when they come near to the altar to minister, to burn offerings made by fire unto the Lord, so they shall wash their hands and their feet, that they die not. And it shall be a statute forever to them, even to him and to his seed throughout their generations." A statute meaning a law or a rule, that they would always wash before they entered into the holy place, or the most holy place. They would always wash before they entered the tabernacle. Okay, so the laver is basically this big brass tub that they would use to wash. They would put water in it, and they would wash their hands and their feet before they entered, so as not to defile themselves, symbolizing baptism. Actually, you'll learn more about that next week. So we have the altar of burnt offering. Then we have the laver. Now as we go inside, we look to our right, we we have the table of showbread, and we find that in Exodus chapter 25, verses 23 through 30. Now, bear with me. I know that, in the Old Testament, the language is, it's kind of hard to understand sometimes, but it's important. This message is for our time. We must understand there was great care taken to build this sanctuary. And there's a reason for that, because this is a pattern of the heavenly sanctuary, which does exist and was pitched by God and not by man. So if God took such great care to show Moses the pattern, and took such great care in making sure to tell Moses time after time, make sure that you build this according to the pattern which was showed you in the mount. Make sure every detail is built according to the pattern. Then it must be important, and not just for the Jews. So we see in Exodus chapter 25, verses 23 through 30, the table for the showbread. Thou shalt also make a table of shittim wood, acacia. 2 cubits shall be the length thereof, and a cubit the breadth thereof, and a cubit and a half the height thereof. And thou shalt overlay it with pure gold, and make thereto a crown of gold round about. A crown meaning it's a border of gold round about. And thou shalt make unto it a border of a handbreadth round about, and thou shalt make a golden crown to the border thereof round about, 3 inches. And thou shalt make for it 4 rings of gold, and put the rings in the 4 corners that are on the 4 feet thereof. Over against the border shall the rings be for places of the staves to bear the table. And thou shalt make the staves of shittim wood, acacia, and overlay them with gold, that the table may be borne with them. And thou shalt make the dishes thereof, and spoons thereof, and covers thereof, and bowls thereof, to cover withal. Of pure gold shalt thou make them. And thou shalt set upon the table showbread before me always. Now, there was 12 loaves, or 12 cakes of showbread that were placed on the table in stacks, 2 stacks of 6, symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel, which we, again, will get into next week. So, now, if we look at the sanctuary, so we've gotten this far. We've gotten from the altar of burnt sacrifice to the laver to the table of showbread. Now we'll skip the front part, the altar of incense right now. We'll skip to the golden candlestick. Okay? So in verse 31 of Exodus chapter 25, it says, And thou shalt make a candlestick of pure gold, of beaten work shall the candlestick be made. His shaft and his branches, his bowls, his knobs, and his flowers shall be of the same. And 6 branches shall come out of the side of it, 3 branches of the candlestick out of the one side, and 3 branches of the candlestick out of the other side. 3 bowls made like unto almonds, with a knob and a flower in one branch, and 3 bowls like almonds in the other branch, with a knob and a flower. So in the 6 branches that come out of the candlestick. And in the candlestick shall be 4 bowls made like unto almonds, with their knobs and their flowers. Now, we see here the candlestick has very specific directions about bowls and flowers and the decoration of it, and that it's to be a hammered work. It's to be a beaten work, meaning out of one piece of gold. They're supposed to make this, they're supposed to hammer it out of one piece of gold. And it would take a lot of gold, obviously, to create a candlestick like that. So how much exactly is given in verse 39? It says, Of a talent of pure gold shall you make it with all these vessels. A pound of, or a talent of pure gold is somewhere, I believe, around 70 pounds. So it's quite expensive. It's 70 or 80 pounds equals a talent. So 80 pounds of pure gold, and they're to hammer it down into a candlestick that is got basically six branches, and then the middle branch, which goes up higher, and it's for their candles and to burn oil as well, burn a pure olive oil, which we'll get into probably next week when we talk about the symbolism of the furniture in the sanctuary. So we have the golden candlestick representing the 7 churches. We have the table of showbread, and representing the showbread, representing Christ, and also representing, the bread of life, and also the 12 tribes of Israel. We have the altar of burnt offering, we have the laver for baptism, or symbolizing baptism. And then now we've come to the altar of incense. Now the altar of incense is found in Exodus chapter 30, verses 1 through 3, and then verse 6. And we will go there now. Exodus chapter 30, 1 through 3, and verse 6. So, verse 1 says, "And thou shalt make an altar to burn incense upon. Of shittim wood shalt thou make it, acacia. A cubit shall be the length thereof, and a cubit the breadth thereof. 4 squares shall it be, and 2 cubits shall be the height thereof. The horns thereof shall be of the same, 18 inches, 3 feet. And thou shalt overlay it with pure gold, the top thereof and the sides thereof round about, and the horns thereof. And thou shalt make unto it a crown of gold round about." Crown meaning like a walls or a rim or a molding, like a crown molding. Okay, and then in verse 6, "And thou shalt put it before the veil that is by the ark of the testimony, before the mercy seat that is over the testimony, where I will meet with thee." So, here's the basic layout then. We have a cross. Okay, so we have the courtyard here. We have the altar of burnt sacrifice, the laver. And then you go into the apartment, the first apartment, the holy place. To your right would be the table of showbread. To your left, the golden candlestick. Directly in front of you, the altar of incense. And then directly behind the altar of incense, the veil, so that the smoke, or the smoke from the incense would pour into that holy, most holy place, and it would fill up that apartment. So then beyond the veil, only the high priest could go only once a year. So the daily sacrifice would entail going into the holy place every day. But only once a year would anyone go beyond that veil, the veil separating the holy place and most holy place. And the veil itself was a thick curtain that had angels, cherubim, embroidered on it. And it was a very beautiful curtain, but they would sprinkle blood on the curtain. So basically in the presence, or before the presence of the Father, the priest would sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice onto the veil, onto the curtain, before the altar of incense. And so the last piece of furniture in the sanctuary is the Ark of the Covenant. Now this is the only article of furniture that is found in the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, and also of the earthly sanctuary, the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle, Brother Gordon got into it a little bit last week about the Ark of the Covenant, what exactly it is and what exactly it contains. It's a big wooden box made of acacia that is overlaid round about with gold, and then there is what's put on top of it, the lid of it, is called the mercy seat. Now, the mercy seat we find in the book of Psalms also, where it says righteousness and peace have kissed each other. And so the mercy seat symbolizes, it's a symbol of God's throne. And the Shekinah glory, God's direct presence, would dwell directly above that mercy seat. Now, the actual mercy seat also had 2 cherubim, which is the Hebrew word for a certain type of angel. There was 2 types, the cherubim and the seraphim. The cherubim would be facing one another with their heads down, and they would have one wing down and one wing up, and their wings would come over the mercy seat like this, and the wings that were up would touch like this. And so the Israelites would also use this sort of as an oracle. There would be like, basically if they had a question and they wanted it answered, when they would enter into the most holy place, they would have like the light either on the left hand side meant yes and the right hand side meant no, or vice versa, which way the light reflected, the Shekinah glory reflected off the wings. So inside this ark, it was like a treasure chest, basically, where they would store the most valuable treasures of Israel, which were, or God's most valuable treasures, which were the 10 Commandments. His law was put directly into the ark, into this box. There was a pot of manna, which was the bread that God rained from heaven for Israel for the 40 years that they were in the wilderness. Um, he collected an omer, which is a unit of measurement. It's like a big pot, and it was put in there. And also Aaron's rod that budded, symbolizing the priesthood being given to the Aaronites, and namely the high priest position, and the priesthood being given to the Levites. So there was Aaron's rod, which had almonds, blossoms, and leaves, all three at the same time, which, if you know anything about how plants grow, especially fruit-bearing trees, they don't bear blossoms, leaves, or shoots. They don't bear shoots, blossoms, and fruit all at the same time. Those are different stages. So it really was a manifestation of God's power that this rod brought forth all three at one time. Brother Gordon will probably get into that more next week. So I hope that this video has been helpful to you to understand the basic layout of the sanctuary, of the tabernacle, the articles of furniture. Like I said, Brother Gordon next week will get into the actual symbolism behind them, the type meets antitype kind of stuff behind the articles of furniture. I hope this has helped, though, to provide a basic map of the sanctuary, what it looks like, what it was like, the articles of furniture, where they were in position, where they were positioned in the tabernacle service, what was in which apartment, and sort of the purpose of each one, a brief overview. So I hope that you'll continue to watch this series, study it out for yourselves, Exodus chapter 26 through Exodus chapter 30. Those are good reads. I would read one chapter at a time just to make sure you can really grasp everything that, because it's so specific, the dimensions and the requirements. So I would encourage you to read it. And then also in your New Testament, I would encourage you to read the book of Hebrews chapter 9 for a New Testament reference to the sanctuary and to the articles of furniture. Briefly, I'll read Hebrews chapter 9 verse 2, which is a New Testament reference. So just to provide some New Testament context, so Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 2 says, "For there was a tabernacle made, the first wherein was the candlestick, and the table and the showbread, which is called the sanctuary," or the Hebrew word kadesh, which means holy place. And then verse 3, "And after the second veil, the tabernacle, which is called the holiest of all, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round about with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had manna, and Aaron's rod that had budded, and the tables of the covenant," meaning the two tablets of the Ten Commandments. They were written on stone with the finger of God. Verse 5, "And over it the cherubims of glory shadowing the mercy seat, of which we cannot now speak particularly in detail. Now when these things were thus ordained, the priests went always into the first tabernacle, accomplishing the service of God," or performing the service of God. "But into the second went the high priest alone once every year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the errors of the people." This is a good place to stop and to lead into part 6, which Brother Gordon will be doing next Sabbath. So we see in the New Testament the reference that there was a tabernacle made, and that it's made after the tabernacle in heaven. And here we see confirmed the different articles of furniture and their locations, that the table of showbread, the candlestick, the altar of incense were inside the first apartment, and that the Ark of the Covenant was inside the second or most holy place. So please like and subscribe to our ministry page. Continue to share our videos with your friends, and open your Bibles and study it out for yourselves. Don't take our word for it. We definitely, that is our goal. And that is our prayer, is that our videos will lead you to the Bible for yourselves, to study out these things and see if they are so. And we feel very confident that you will see that these things are so, because, we try to stick to the Bible as much as we can. and you can't go wrong with the Word of God. So we thank you very much. Continue to support our ministry, Green Cord Ministries on YouTube, and share the page with your friends. And yeah, God bless you, and we'll see you next Sabbath with Brother Gordon.